I did it. I rebought the Omega Speedmaster, a watch that I had owned and sold and planned to move on from. So today I want to talk about why I rebought this Omega Speedmaster, but more specifically why I bought this version of the Omega Speedmaster. And if you're out there looking for an Omega Speedmaster, how to help you, maybe help you on your journey, or at least give you some reasons as to why I got this one and how that might help you. Let's recap a little bit. For those of you that are newer to the channel, I owned an Omega Speedmaster. I bought it originally, I think in 2021. I owned it for about a year and I ended up selling it. And there were basically one reason why I sold it at the time. My wife and I went on a honeymoon. We were in Geneva, Switzerland. I wanted to buy a watch at the time. I was really interested in buying an Explorer 2. We were in a shop, they had a good price on it. I bought it. In order to buy it, I needed to sell a watch to fund it. And more specifically, well, I only had two real watches that I could sell in order to fund it. One was my Speedmaster and one was my Explorer. Now, I wasn't going to sell my Explorer for a multitude of reasons, all of which I've covered on the channel a million times, so feel free to go through all of those videos. But I basically then decided that it was time to move on from the Speedmaster. And I had reasons why I was considering selling it in general, because I was thinking about buying a different version of it. And this kind of harkens to the video I made last week, which was the concept of a value watch or making a value-based decision rather than the decision of what you actually want. I originally bought, my first Speedmaster was a Speedmaster Automatic. And I sold it because I wanted a Speedy Pro. That's what I wanted, was this watch. And then when I bought the Speedy Pro, I basically started at a vintage model, bought a vintage Speedmaster, came back the same day, traded it in, and bought instead the watch I wanted, which was the modern coaxial version of the Omega Speedmaster, because I wanted the updated bracelet. I liked the concept of the coaxial in the back. I'm like watch books and watchmaking. And so again, all my videos cover that. So I wanted a lot of the updates that came with the 3861. I wanted the coaxial movement. I wanted the free sprung balance. I wanted the silicone hairspring. I wanted the hacking feature that you don't find in the older versions. I wanted the updated bracelet. And so I ended up pulling the trigger. I had swapped it out and got the Hess-Lite version, but I didn't want to spend the extra $800 to move to a Sapphire, which in retrospect was, again, me making a decision based on trying not to spend as much money as I really, really wanted. What I wanted was the Sapphire case back and the Sapphire crystal. And that's evidenced by the fact that I actually swapped the case back on my Hess-Lite version with this Sapphire case back so that I could see the 3861 on my Hess-Lite version. And if you own a Hess-Lite and you want something like this, again, I have videos showing me swapping out the back for this right here. So that was a lot of what was going on. So I ended up deciding recently when I was going to re-add it that I was going to just pull the trigger, buy the 3861, the updated one with the updated bracelet, Sapphire sandwich. Now, that isn't to say that the Speedmaster really has a downside. It doesn't really have a bad version of it. You can buy a $3,000 unit that you buy from Japan that's a little older, that's built in the 90s, and it's going to be great. It's hard to go wrong with a Speedmaster. You really are going to get a fantastic design that everyone understands, everyone knows, and everyone likes because of the fact that it is so legible. It is so iconic. It's subtle, but it's not that subtle. If you're into watches, or even if you're not into watches, your assumption is that it's a relatively more expensive watch. But at the same point, the Speedmaster has a lot of boring aspects to it. It's two colors. It's black and white. It typically doesn't have any applied indices. In this case, the Sapphire crystal has an applied logo at the top, but you know, it doesn't really have any big recesses. It doesn't really have applied markers. It doesn't have anything really shiny or reflective. It doesn't have a nice ceramic bezel that, you know, oohs and ahs someone. It doesn't have subdials a different color, at least not this traditional Speedmaster variant. I know there's a billion variants of Speedmasters, so I'm not going to get into all of them. But just the traditional Speedmaster look is boring. It doesn't have a whole lot to really just like wow you. And that's kind of why a lot of people, myself included, when you see the Speedmaster the first time, you go into a showroom and you look at it, especially if you've seen all these videos and my shots, and hopefully my shots convince you that the Speedmaster is fantastic because it is an amazing watch. you're kind of underwhelmed. It just doesn't have anything that screams out at you. And there are other watches that do. The Navitimer has a lot of different features, interest, color, contrast that make you interested. The bezel's really reflective, and so it seems like a luxury piece. And obviously Rolex has that in a lot of their models, and this does not have that. It seems like a watch. You know, there isn't something that screams out at you on the basic Speedmaster. And that, you know, is probably part of the reason why people love it and part of the reason why people hate it. Before I get too far into why I bought this specific Speedmaster, if you're interested in Speedmasters in general and helping make a buying decision for you, you might want to be subscribed to look at a roundup. I'm going to do a roundup of multiple different Speedmaster models from basically anything the jewelry shop has, from vintage all the way up through modern, and talk about the pros and cons of different Speedmasters. I can even go into the Moonwatch only book there and talk about different models and advantages between those. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, subscribe, ring the bell. You know, that way you can know when I make that video and stick around till then. So I've already covered kind of why I bought the Speedmaster. This is really the model that I wanted originally. Now, I've made reference of how I've thought about getting a vintage model in a couple videos, and I didn't end up buying a vintage model for one reason, and that is peace of mind. I work in a warehouse. I am out on the factory floor all the time. I run the operations there, which means that I am back there all the time. I sometimes have to get in the weld cage, or I have to run the CNC, or I have to drill something or measure something or whatever. There's a lot of steel and aluminum parts and a lot of things going around, and my Hess-Lite version always had scratches on it. And I know you can use Polywatch, and people use Polywatch, but my God, I would use it every other week, and still I always had scratches on that darn crystal, and it bothered me like crazy. And what I found really interesting about this is I've actually gotten so used to it that when I look at this watch, I expect there to be scratches. And I have really enjoyed the fact that I have something on there, a smudge or something, and I wipe it and it's gone. I get why people buy the Hess-Lite version, but if you're someone like me that I want to wear it and forget that I'm really wearing it and not be overly worried, not be overly considerate, I like to just wear it. You know, I think of watches sometimes the way I think of a nice truck. You know, it is nice, and at least this is how I handle my trucks. It's nice. I love how it feels or how, you know, it drives. But in the end, it gets me from one place to the other, and I don't want to have to worry about if I need to service it or if anything's going to go wrong. Or if I drive over a pothole, I like the fact that I don't have to think about, you know, it's probably not going to break the truck. Whereas a small car, you may be worried depending on the size of the pothole. I love that concept of just going with it. Or once your hands are dirty, you don't really think about the fact that you need to wash your hands, because who cares? Your hands are already dirty. You might as well move on to the next task. That's kind of how I feel about watches. I like to not worry or not think about them. So I didn't go with the vintage. I didn't go with the Hess-Lite. I went with the sapphire version. And, you know, there are plenty of other videos that I've made talking about why I love the Speedmaster. Obviously, I've covered a few of them here. It also has some things that people don't like the aluminum bezel insert and the raised edge on that bezel. And, you know, I get those points. The aluminum bezel insert is outdated. I think it should be ceramic on the fact that it's an $8,000 watch. I think it's pretty straightforward. Especially if you're going to go from a Hess-Lite to a sapphire version. Okay, you don't care about the historic element of a Hess-Lite crystal. At least upgrade the bezel to a ceramic bezel so that it's in the same vein as this. I don't really need to baby it. I don't need to worry about it. I think that's pretty straightforward. The only other thing that I'm going to note before I just talk generally about what I would recommend if you're out there for a Speedmaster is the bracelet. One of the things that you see online about the difference between these in pictures is the bracelet of the Sapphire has the polished mid links or side links next to the mid link, and the Hess-Lite has all brushed. And I thought that was going to be blingy. I thought it was going to be a big deal. It is not. I can hardly tell that area is polished. In harsh light, sometimes I can notice, but for the most part, it just blends right in. I don't think it's overly obvious to the point where you need to make a buying decision based on whether or not that link is polished. I thought I did when I was in the jewelry store, but once you wear it and once it has a few scratches, you do not notice, at least in my opinion, the difference that much between when I used to have the other bracelet and now that I have this one. This is not that much more blingy or dressy. The sapphire, in my opinion, I think is the way to go if you're going to buy one. I understand the reason why people are interested in the Hesalite. Yes, you would not wear a sapphire watch if you were worried about shatterability in space. And yes, it is less expensive to replace a Hesalite, and there's less damage. If it shatters, it won't damage the dial as much because it doesn't shatter like this does. It just cracks and breaks off. But if you work in an industry like I do, it will always be scratched. So just keep that in mind. I like to be realistic with you. I would highly recommend to do this if you work in an industry like me. If you're someone that wears a dress watch all the time or acrylic crystal dress watch all the time, maybe it doesn't matter to you because you're not going to damage it anyway. But I certainly did and would. So highly recommend the sapphire version. Whether or not you go with an older sapphire version or this one, I think is up to you. I think it's a pricing decision. I don't think that there's that much that makes you have to move on to this unless you really like the coaxial, really like the free spun balance and the silicone hairspring. But most of those are word jargon. Like, I'm not going to have this next to really strong magnets. Well, I do because I've made a video about magnets, but most people aren't going to have it next to really strong magnets to worry about the hairspring. The free sprung balance is like a cool little watchmaking thing, but is it worth the extra several $1,000s? Probably not. The only thing I think that makes this potentially worth the extra money, and it's definitely not the dot over 90, who cares about that, is the bracelet. This is the only thing I think that might be worth it to you. I can't remember, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, whether or not you can put this on an old Speedmaster. I believe you can. So in that case, you can always buy it secondhand, separate, and then attach it. But at that point, you're about the same price as buying this unit with the bracelet attached. If you're going to buy a Speedmaster in general, definitely get it on the bracelet. In terms of the new one and the old ones, it doesn't really matter. If you're hard pressed on money and you really just want a Speedmaster in your collection and you don't want to spend any over $3,500 on it, look at Japan used market. Plenty of Speedmasters in that price point, especially up to $4,000, and you don't have to buy this version. All right, so I knew this was going to be a little bit of a longer one, but I wanted to cover a lot of ground. Let me know if you guys have anything to add to this conversation. Leave them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.